The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and vanilla, the warm scent of the apple pie I'd baked all morning. At 56, I didn't often pull out my old recipe book, but today was special. My granddaughter Sophie was turning 6, and my son Daniel had invited me to their home in suburban Atlanta for her birthday party. I could already see Sophie's eyes sparkling when she saw the pie, her favorite, with its golden crust, just the way she liked it. What kind of grandmother shows up empty-handed to a celebration like that?
Subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from, because this story is about to take you on an emotional journey you won't soon forget.
I'm Patricia Evans, a widow who raised Daniel and his sister Laura, single-handedly after my husband Richard died in a car accident 18 years ago. I worked long hours as a school secretary pinching pennies to make sure my kids had clothes books and a roof over their heads. I never minded the exhaustion, not when it meant Daniel could go to college or Laura could take dance lessons. Daniel, my youngest, was always my rock. He'd wrap his arms around me as a boy, promising, "Mom, I'm gonna take care of you one day." Those words kept me going. I believed in him, in us. This party wasn't just a birthday. It was a chance to feel close to my family again. Daniel married Jessica 7 years ago, and after that, things shifted. They settled an hour away, and the phone calls dwindled, the visits all but stopped. I told myself it was life, marriage, a new baby. It all takes time. But I missed them. I missed Daniel's laugh, the way Jessica used to ask for my recipes. So when Daniel called last week, his voice bright and familiar, inviting me to Sophie's party, my heart leapt. I spent days preparing the pie, a gift for Sophie, a stuffed bunny I'd saved for months to buy, and a new scarf to look my best. I wanted them to see I was still Patricia, the one who'd always shown up. The drive to their house was peaceful, the Georgia pines lining the highway under a soft blue sky. Their neighborhood was all tidy lawns and white picket fences, the kind of place I'd dreamed of for my kids. I pulled into their driveway, my pulse quickening with excitement. Pink and purple streamers fluttered from the porch, and I could hear music and chatter from the backyard. I grabbed the pie, its warmth seeping through the tin, and headed toward the front door. I pictured Sophie racing to me, shouting, Grandma, and Daniel pulling me into a hug. Maybe Jessica would offer me a glass of lemonade like old times. For the first time in years, I felt like I was home. I rang the doorbell, the pie steady in my hands, and waited. No one came. The music from the backyard grew louder, so I followed the sound, stepping around the house to the gate. It was ajar, and I slipped through, scanning the crowd. There were neighbors' kids chasing balloons, Jessica's parents, but no Daniel, no Sophie. I spotted Jessica by the picnic table, her auburn hair glinting as she laughed with a group of friends. I started toward her, ready to smile, when her voice stopped me cold. "Patricia's here," Jessica said, her tone sharp, speaking to her sister. She hadn't seen me. I told Daniel to keep her away. She'll just hover and make it all about her. My breath caught. The pie tin burned against my palms as my grip tightened. Jessica's sister smirked. "Relax, Jess. Daniel said he told her the party's next weekend. She won't show." The words hit like a slap. My son, my Daniel, had lied to me. He'd invited me to a party that wasn't real, tricked me to keep me away from his family. The music faded, replaced by a hollow ache in my chest. I stood there holding the pie I'd made with love, invisible to the people I'd given everything for. All those years of sacrifice, all the dreams I'd poured into Daniel, had they been for nothing? My heart screamed to turn and run, but my feet wouldn't move. This wasn't a mistake. This was betrayal, and it hurt more than I could bear. The backyard blurred as my eyes stung, but I refused to let the tears fall. Not here, not now. The pie tin was still warm in my hands, its weight anchoring me as Jessica's words echoed in my head. I told Daniel to keep her away. My son, my Daniel, had planned this, lied to me, sent me chasing a fake invitation to Sophie's birthday party. The laughter and music around me felt like a cruel mockery, each note twisting the knife deeper. I stood frozen by the gate, the pink and purple streamers swaying in the Georgia breeze, taunting me with their cheer. I wanted to march over to Jessica to demand why she'd said those things, but my legs wouldn't move. Instead, my mind raced back to the years I'd given everything for Daniel. I saw myself at 38 exhausted after a 12-hour shift, still sitting up with him to help with algebra homework. I remembered skipping meals so he could have new sneakers for basketball, the ones he swore would make him a star. "You're the best mom," he'd say, his grin wide enough to light up the room. That boy was gone now, replaced by a man who'd rather deceive me than let me near his family. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually, I forced myself to move. I set the pie on a nearby table, next to half-eaten trays of sandwiches and a melting ice cream cake. No one noticed me. Not Jessica, still laughing with her friends, nor her parents, who were busy corralling kids near the bounce house. I scanned the crowd for Daniel, hoping to see his familiar broad shoulders, his dark hair, but he was nowhere. Maybe he was inside, avoiding me. The thought made my stomach churn. I slipped back through the gate and walked to my car, the gravel crunching under my shoes. Inside, I locked the doors and let my head fall against the steering wheel. The silence was deafening, broken only by my ragged breaths. Why would Daniel do this? Had I become a burden, someone to be managed like an unwanted guest? I thought of Sophie, my sweet granddaughter, who used to cling to my hand and beg for stories. Did she even know I was supposed to be here? Or had Daniel and Jessica erased me from her life too? I drove home in a daze, the Atlanta skyline fading into the dusk. My small apartment felt colder than usual when I stepped inside the walls, too quiet. I sank onto the couch, still in my scarf and dress, and let the pain wash over me. It wasn't just the lie, it was the deliberate cruelty of it. Daniel hadn't just forgotten to invite me. He'd orchestrated a plan to keep me away, to make sure I wouldn't hover, as Jessica put it. The word stung. I'd never wanted to be the center of attention. All I'd ever wanted was to be part of their lives. As the night wore on, I replayed every moment of the day, searching for clues I'd missed. I thought about the call from Daniel, how his voice had sounded so warm, so genuine. "Mom, we'd love for you to come to Sophie's party," he'd said. "It's Saturday at 2. Bring that apple pie she loves." I'd been so thrilled I hadn't noticed the slight pause before he spoke, the way he'd rushed off the phone. Had it all been an act? Then I remembered something else. A few months ago, Jessica had mentioned they were struggling with the mortgage on their house. I'd offered to help, dipping into my savings to send them $5,000. Daniel had thanked me, promising to pay it back, but I'd waved it off. "It's for family," I'd said. Now I wondered if that money had meant nothing to them. Had they taken it and still decided I wasn't worth having around? The thought made my chest tighten, but it also sparked something else, a flicker of anger beneath the hurt. I got up and rummaged through my desk, pulling out a folder where I kept important papers. Among them was a bank statement from last month showing the balance of my savings account. It wasn't much by some standards, but it was mine, built over decades of careful scrimping. I'd always planned to use it for something special, maybe a trip with Sophie one day, or a gift for Daniel and his sister. But there was another account, one I'd never told anyone about, not even my kids. It was a small investment account my husband Richard had set up before he died, tucked away in a trust. I'd let it grow quietly, a secret safety net. As I stared at the numbers, a new thought took root. Maybe it was time to stop giving everything away. The next morning, I woke with a dull ache in my heart, but a clearer head. I couldn't let this go. I needed answers. I called Daniel, my fingers trembling as I dialed. He picked up on the third ring, his voice cheerful. "Hey, Mom. What's up? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Daniel, why did you tell me Sophie's party was next weekend? There was a long pause, and in that silence, I knew the truth. He stammered, "Oh, must have been a mix-up. I'm sorry, Mom." But his voice was too smooth, too practiced. I hung up, my anger growing. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. I drove back to their house that afternoon, uninvited, determined to face them. The streamers were gone, the backyard empty, but Daniel's car was in the driveway. I knocked, and when he opened the door, his face paled. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked, his eyes darting behind me like he was checking for witnesses. I stepped inside, my voice steady, despite the storm inside me. "I was at the party yesterday, Daniel. I heard what Jessica said. I know you lied to keep me away." He froze, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Then, to my shock, he dropped to his knees, his hands clasped. "Mom, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I didn't mean it." His voice cracked, but his eyes were dry, and something about his plea felt hollow. I looked at him, the boy I'd raised, and realized I didn't recognize him anymore. This was just the beginning, and I wasn't going to let him off that easily. Daniel's knees hit the hardwood floor, his hands clasped like a child caught stealing cookies. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he repeated, his voice trembling just enough to sound convincing. But I stood in the doorway of his Atlanta home, my arms crossed, and studied him. The boy who once promised to take care of me was gone, replaced by a man whose eyes darted nervously, avoiding mine. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, and the living room behind him was pristine, too perfect, like a stage set for someone else's life. I wanted to believe his apology, but the sting of yesterday's betrayal, the memory of Jessica's sharp words at Sophie's party, held me back. "Get up, Daniel," I said, my voice colder than I intended. He scrambled to his feet, brushing his jeans, and gestured toward the couch. "Can we talk? Please?" I hesitated, then nodded, stepping inside. The house felt unfamiliar, despite the photos of Sophie on the walls. Her gap-toothed smile, a painful reminder of why I'd come. I sat, my purse clutched in my lap, and waited. Daniel paced, rubbing the back of his neck. "It was a mistake, Mom. Jessica, she got stressed about the party, and I thought it'd be easier if you came another time. Easier for who I asked, my words sharp." He flinched, and for a moment I saw the boy who'd cried when I stitched up his torn baseball glove. But that boy wouldn't have lied to keep me away from my granddaughter. "I heard Jessica, Daniel. She said she told you to keep me away. And you did. You lied about the date, sent me on a fool's errand with a pie I spent hours making. Do you know what that felt like?" His face crumpled, but his eyes stayed dry. "I didn't mean to hurt you. Things have been tough, you know? The housework, Sophie's school. It's a lot." I wanted to soften, to reach out, but his words felt rehearsed, like lines from a script. I thought of the $5,000 I'd sent them for their mortgage money I'd scraped from my savings. Had that been part of their tough times, or just another thing they took for granted? I left that day with no answers, only a gnawing ache in my chest. For weeks, I tried to move on. I called Sophie's school to send her a birthday card, baked cookies for the neighbors, even joined a book club at the local library. But every night alone in my apartment, the hurt crept back. I kept replaying Daniel's excuses, Jessica's sneer, and the way no one at the party had noticed me. I'd given my life to my family, and now I was invisible to them. Worse, I started questioning myself. Had I been too clingy? Had I hovered, like Jessica said? The doubts gnawed at me, but so did my anger, growing sharper with each passing day. One morning, while sorting through old mail, I found a letter from my bank buried under a stack of coupons. It was a reminder about the investment account Richard had left me, The one I'd kept secret, even from my kids. The balance had grown over the years, sitting quietly in a trust $120,000 more than I'd ever imagined. I stared at the numbers, my heart pounding. I'd always planned to use it for my kids, maybe a college fund for Sophie, or a cushion for Daniel and Laura. But now, I wasn't so sure. Why should I keep giving to people who pushed me away? That letter was the first spark. The second came a week later, when I ran into Ellen, an old friend from my secretary days at the grocery store. Her silver hair was pulled into a neat bun, and her smile was as warm as ever. "Patricia, you look like you're carrying the world," she said, her eyes soft with concern. Over coffee at a nearby diner, I spilled everything: Daniel's lie, Jessica's words, the party that wasn't meant for me. Ellen listened, her hands wrapped around her mug, and when I finished, she leaned forward. "You've spent your life putting them first, Pat. When do you get to matter?" Her words hit hard. I'd always seen myself as the giver mom, widow grandma, but Ellen saw me as more. She told me about her own life, how she'd started a small catering business after her divorce, how she'd learned to value herself. "You're not just their mother," she said. "You're Patricia, and you deserve better." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope, like a window cracking open in a stuffy room. But hope didn't erase the pain, and the pain didn't erase the questions. I started digging. I checked my bank records, looking for anything odd about the money I'd sent Daniel. That's when I noticed it: a withdrawal I didn't recognize, $2,000, made a month after I'd sent them the $5,000. My name was on the account, but I hadn't authorized it. My heart sank as I called the bank, my fingers shaking. The clerk confirmed it. Daniel had used an old power of attorney, one I'd signed years ago when Richard was sick, to access my account. It wasn't just the party. My own son had taken money from me behind my back. The betrayal cut deeper than the lie about the party. I sat at my kitchen table, the bank statement crumpled in my hand, and felt the world shift. This wasn't just thoughtlessness. Daniel and Jessica had used me, taken my love and my money, while plotting to keep me at arm's length. I thought of Sophie, of the stuffed bunny I'd bought her, still sitting unwrapped in my closet. Did they even tell her I'd tried to come? The anger I'd been holding back surged, hot and fierce, but it wasn't just anger at them. It was anger at myself for trusting too much, for giving too much, for letting myself become invisible. That night, I called Ellen. "I need help," I said, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. "I want to know my options." She connected me with a lawyer, a sharp woman named Karen, who specialized in family disputes. Karen's office was small but warm, with photos of her own kids on the desk. She listened as I told her everything, her pen scratching notes. "Patricia," she said, looking up, "you have more power than you think. That account Daniel accessed, we can start there. And that trust fund, it's yours to control." Karen's words were a lifeline, but it was the next discovery that pushed me over the edge. While sorting through Richard's old files, I found a letter tucked inside a folder of insurance papers. It was from Daniel, written 2 years ago, addressed to Jessica's father. "We need to secure the house," it read. "Mom's savings won't be enough, but her trust fund could cover it. She doesn't need to know." My hands shook as I read it, the words blurring through tears. Daniel hadn't just taken money. He'd been planning to take more, to use the one thing Richard had left me, all while keeping me out of their lives. That was it. The moment I stopped being the mother who waited, who forgave, who hoped. I looked at the letter, at the bank statement, at the life I'd built for my kids, and I made a decision. No more. I wasn't going to let Daniel and Jessica erase me. I called Karen the next morning and told her to start digging into the trust fund and the unauthorized withdrawal. "I want to take back what's mine," I said, my voice firm. As I hung up, I felt something new, a spark of strength, a plan forming. I didn't know exactly what I'd do, but I knew one thing: I was done being invisible. And Daniel was about to learn what happened when you underestimated Patricia Evans. The lawyer's office smelled of polished wood and fresh coffee, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. Karen sat across from me, her glasses perched on her nose, a stack of papers spread out on the desk. It was a humid Atlanta morning, the kind that made my blouse cling to my skin. But I felt a strange calm as I signed the documents she'd prepared. For weeks, I'd been building to this moment, fueled by the letter from Daniel, plotting to take my trust fund, and the sting of his lie about Sophie's party. Today, I was taking back control, not with tears or shouting, but with the quiet power of a pen. "Patricia, this is airtight," Karen said, tapping the papers. "The trust fund is now locked under your sole control, and the unauthorized withdrawal has been flagged for investigation. Daniel won't be able to touch another cent." I nodded, my heart pounding but steady. The trust fund, $120,000, Richard's last gift to me, was safe. But this wasn't just about money. It was about showing Daniel and Jessica that I wasn't the invisible grandmother they could push aside. I'd spent decades giving them everything. Now, I was reclaiming my worth. Karen handed me one final document, a letter she'd drafted to Daniel and Jessica, outlining the legal steps I was taking. It was formal, unemotional, stating that I'd revoked their access to my accounts and was pursuing repayment for the $2,000 Daniel had taken. "You don't have to send it," Karen said, her eyes searching mine. "But if you do, it's a line in the sand." I took the letter, folding it carefully into my purse. I knew what I had to do. That afternoon, I drove to Daniel's house, the letter tucked beside the stuffed bunny I'd bought for Sophie. The neighborhood was quiet, the white picket fences gleaming under the sun. My hands trembled as I parked, but I forced myself to breathe. This wasn't about revenge. It was about standing up for myself. I knocked on the door, and Jessica answered, her auburn hair pulled into a messy bun. Her smile faltered when she saw me. "Patricia, we weren't expecting you." "I know," I said, stepping past her into the foyer before she could protest. Daniel appeared from the kitchen, a dish towel slung over his shoulder, his face paling. "Mom, what's going on?" Sophie peeked out from behind him, her curls bouncing, and my heart ached. I wanted to scoop her up, but I stayed focused. "I'm here to set things right," I said, my voice steady. I handed Sophie the bunny, watching her eyes light up as she hugged it. Then I turned to Daniel and Jessica, pulling the letter from my purse. "This is for you." I placed it on the hall table, the paper stark against the polished wood. "You lied to keep me away from Sophie's party. You took money from my account without asking. And I know about your plans for my trust fund." Daniel's mouth opened, but no words came. Jessica's eyes narrowed, her arms crossing. "Patricia, you're blowing this out of proportion. We were just—" "No!" I cut her off, my voice rising for the first time. "You don't get to rewrite this. I gave you everything, my time, my money, my love, and you treated me like I was nothing. That stops now." I looked at Daniel, his face a mix of shock and guilt. "I've protected my accounts. You won't touch another dime. And I'm done letting you push me out of Sophie's life." The room was silent, the air thick with tension. Sophie clutched the bunny, her eyes wide, and I softened my tone. "I love you, sweetheart," I told her. "I'll always be your grandma." Then I turned back to Daniel and Jessica. "You can read the letter. My lawyer will handle the rest." I walked out my steps firm against the hardwood floor. As I closed the door behind me, a weight lifted from my chest, like I'd been holding my breath for years, and finally exhaled. The sun was warm on my face, the Georgia air sweet with magnolia. I slid into my car, my hands steady on the wheel, and felt a rush of freedom I hadn't known in decades. I wasn't just Patricia, the mother, the widow, the giver. I was Patricia, period, and I was enough. Daniel's reaction came faster than I expected. My phone buzzed as I pulled into my apartment complex, his name flashing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, my heart racing. When I played the message, his voice was frantic. "Mom, please, let's talk. I didn't mean for this to happen. Jessica's freaking out. We need you." The words were desperate, but they didn't pull me back. I'd heard his apologies before seeing his dry-eyed pleas. This time, I wasn't bending. I sat on my couch, the letter's weight still lingering in my mind, and looked around my small apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The trust fund was mine. My life was mine. For the first time, I felt the strength to protect it all. Daniel and Jessica could scramble, could call, could beg, but I was done being their doormat. I'd drawn my line, and crossing it felt like stepping into a new world, one where I decided who Patricia Evans would be. The days after I left the letter at Daniel's house felt like walking on a tightrope, part thrill, part terror. My phone buzzed relentlessly, Daniel's name lighting up the screen with calls and texts. "Mom, we need to talk. Please, let's fix this." Jessica didn't mean it. I let them pile up unanswered, each one a reminder of the line I'd drawn. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing to forgive, to smooth things over. I'd stood up for myself, and though my heart ached for Sophie, I knew I couldn't go back to being the grandmother they pushed aside. Atlanta's summer heat settled in heavy and thick, but my apartment felt lighter. I opened the windows, letting the breeze carry away the staleness of the past weeks. The stuffed bunny I'd given Sophie haunted me, its twin still sitting in my closet, but I pushed the thought aside. I had work to do. Karen, my lawyer, called to confirm the trust fund was secure, and the bank was investigating the $2,000 Daniel had taken. "They'll likely settle to avoid a bigger mess," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You're in the driver's seat, Patricia." Her words were a lifeline, grounding me as Daniel and Jessica's desperation grew. Their next move came a week later. I was at the grocery store picking out peaches when Ellen texted me a screenshot from a neighborhood app. Jessica had posted a vague sob story. "Family misunderstandings are tearing us apart. Please keep us in your thoughts." The comments were full of sympathy. "You're such a great mom." Jess and I felt a flash of anger. She was painting herself as the victim, twisting the truth to save face. I wanted to call her out, to tell the world how they'd lied about Sophie's party, how Daniel had dipped into my savings, but I didn't. I'd learned from Karen that silence could be stronger than a fight. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. Ellen invited me to help with her catering business, a small operation she ran for local events. "You've got a knack for baking," she said over coffee, her eyes twinkling. "Why not put it to use?" I hesitated. I hadn't worked since my secretary days, but the idea sparked something. I started small baking pies for a church fundraiser. The smell of cinnamon and apples filled my kitchen again, and when people raved about my crust, I felt a pride I'd forgotten. It wasn't just about the pies. It was about creating something for myself, not just for others. Daniel didn't give up. One evening, he showed up at my apartment unannounced, his face drawn and tired. I let him in, more out of curiosity than warmth. He sat on my couch, hands clasped, and launched into a speech. "Mom, I messed up. Jessica was stressed, and I didn't want to argue with her. The money, I thought it was okay since you'd helped before. I'm sorry." His voice cracked, but I saw the same calculated look he'd had when he begged for forgiveness before. I let him talk, my silence louder than his words. When he finished, I leaned forward, my voice steady. "Daniel, you didn't just mess up. You lied to keep me from Sophie. You took money that wasn't yours, And you planned to take more. His eyes widened, and I knew he'd read the letter, knew I'd found his note to Jessica's father about my trust fund. I love you, I said, my throat tight, but I can't trust you. Not now. He left head bowed, promising to make it right. But the next day, Jessica called, her tone sharp. Patricia, you're tearing our family apart. Sophie's asking for you and you're punishing her for our mistakes. Her words cut deep, and for a moment, I wavered. Was I being too hard? Was I hurting Sophie? But then I remembered the party, the way Jessica had sneered about me hovering. This wasn't about Sophie. It was about control. I met with Karen again, and she suggested a bold step, a formal agreement to ensure my access to Sophie. You're her grandmother, she said. You have rights. We drafted a letter proposing scheduled visits sent to Daniel and Jessica through Karen's office. Their response was swift, a curt email agreeing to one visit a month supervised. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The first visit at a park near their house was bittersweet. Sophie ran to me, her arms wide, and for an hour we played and laughed. Jessica watched from a bench, her face tight, but I focused on Sophie's giggles, her small hand in mine. Another discovery came unexpectedly. While cleaning out a box of Richard's old things, I found a journal he'd kept before his accident. In it, he wrote about me, Patricia's the strongest person I know. She'll always find a way, no matter what. Tears pricked my eyes as I read it, but it also clarified something. Daniel's betrayal wasn't my fault. I'd given him love, a home, a future, but I couldn't control his choices. And I didn't have to let them define me. I started saying yes to new things. I joined Ellen's catering team, officially taking on more events. I reconnected with Laura, my daughter, who lived in Nashville. She'd been distant, caught up in her own life, but when I told her about Daniel, she drove down for a weekend. We talked for hours, and she hugged me tight. I didn't know Mom. I'm here now. Her support felt like a bridge to a new kind of family, one built on choice, not obligation. By the end of the summer, Daniel and Jessica's calls had slowed their attempts to guilt me fading. The bank settled the $2,000 issue, and Daniel repaid it, though he never mentioned it. I didn't care. I was too busy living. At a catering event, a woman named Diane, a retired teacher, complimented my pies and invited me to her art class. I laughed, saying I wasn't creative, but she insisted. You're more than you think, she said, echoing Ellen's words. I signed up, my hands soon smudged with charcoal, my heart lighter with each sketch. One evening, as I set out ingredients for a peach pie, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel. Can we meet, just me and you? I stared at it, the flour dusting my fingers, and felt the weight of all we'd been through. Part of me wanted to say no, to keep my distance, but another part, the part that still saw the boy who'd promised to take care of me, wanted to hear him out. I typed back, okay, next week. Whatever he said, I knew one thing: I wasn't the same Patricia who'd stood invisible at Sophie's party. I'd found my voice, my strength, and no one could take that away. The Atlanta skyline glowed softly as I drove to meet Daniel at a small diner on the edge of town. It was a crisp September evening, the air carrying the first hint of fall. I'd chosen the place carefully neutral ground, far from the memories of Sophie's party or the tension of his pristine suburban home. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my heart churned with a mix of resolve and lingering hope. I wasn't the same Patricia who'd stood frozen clutching a pie while Jessica's words cut me down. I'd found my strength, rebuilt my life, but a part of me still wanted to understand why my son had pushed me away. The diner was quiet, its neon sign buzzing faintly. Daniel was already there, seated in a corner booth, his broad shoulders hunched over a coffee mug. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. I slid into the seat across from him, my purse at my side, and met his gaze. Thanks for coming, Mom, he said, his voice low. I nodded, waiting. I wasn't here to fill the silence for him anymore. He took a deep breath, his fingers tracing the mug's handle. "I've been a terrible son," he began. "The party, the money, all of it. I let Jessica call the shots, and I didn't stand up for you. I was scared of losing her, of messing up what we had, but I messed up with you instead." His eyes met mine, and this time they were wet, not calculated. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know I see it now. I see what I did." I listened, my heart softening, but not breaking. His words were honest, raw, but they couldn't erase the months of pain, the lie about Sophie's party, the $2,000 he'd taken, the letter, plotting to use my trust fund. "Daniel," I said, my voice calm but firm, "I love you. I always will. But love doesn't mean I let you hurt me. You made choices, and those choices broke something between us." He nodded, his jaw tight, and for the first time, I saw him truly listen. We talked for an hour, not just about the betrayal, but about the years that led to it. He admitted Jessica's influence had grown, her need for control clashing with my presence. He spoke of stress work, money, parenting, and how he'd taken the easy path, letting me become collateral damage. I shared my side too, the loneliness, the shock of feeling invisible, the strength I'd found in rebuilding. When we parted, there was no grand reconciliation, no tearful hug, but there was a quiet understanding. We'd both changed, and whatever came next would be different. Back home, I felt a weight lift, not because Daniel had apologized, but because I'd realized I didn't need his validation to know my worth. I'd spent decades defining myself as a mother, a giver. But now, I was Patricia Baker, artist friend. Ellen's catering business had become my anchor. Each pie I baked a small act of creation. My art classes with Diane were a revelation, my charcoal sketches of Georgia landscapes lining my apartment walls. Laura, my daughter, had started calling weekly, our bond, growing stronger with each conversation. And Sophie, my sweet Sophie, was a regular part of my life again. Our monthly park visits filled with laughter and stories, no longer shadowed by Jessica's disapproval. One afternoon, inspired by Richard's journal, I started a new project. I used a portion of the trust fund to create a small scholarship for single mothers at the local community college, naming it after my husband. It wasn't about the money. It was about giving back in a way that felt true to me, not out of obligation. The first recipient, a young woman named Maria, sent me a thank you note that I framed. "You've given me a chance to build a better life for my son." Reading it, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. My apartment, once a place of quiet pain, was now a haven. I'd painted the walls a soft blue, hung my sketches, and filled the space with the smell of baking. One evening, as I watched the sunset from my balcony, the sky streaked with pink and gold, I thought back to Sophie's party. That day I'd felt like nothing, a ghost in my own family. Now I stood tall, my life full of purpose, and people who saw me for me. I'd lost something with Daniel, but I'd gained so much more. The journey hadn't been easy, but it taught me a truth I wanted to shout to the world: I was enough. Not because of what I gave or who I loved, but because of who I was. I'd rebuilt my life at 56, and if I could do it, anyone could. As the last light faded, I made a promise to myself to keep living, creating, loving, but never again at the cost of my own worth. The Georgia night wrapped around me like a warm embrace, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. Standing on my balcony that night, watching the Georgia sky fade to dusk, I realized how far I'd come. Betrayal had broken me, but it also built me into someone stronger, someone who knew her worth. My story isn't just mine, it's a piece of a bigger tapestry, woven from the triumphs and heartaches of women like me, like you. Have you ever been pushed aside, made to feel small, only to rise again? Maybe you've faced a lie, a loss, or a moment that made you question everything. I want to hear about it. Share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters, and it could light the way for someone else. Let's build a community where we lift each other up, where no one feels invisible. You're not alone, and it's never too late to claim the life you deserve. Tell me what's one step you've taken to find your strength. Let's inspire each other right here, right now.
Subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from, because this story is about to take you on an emotional journey you won't soon forget.